This is AMTV. Hello there everyone, and welcome to part 18 of this series looking at the history and impact of Doctor Who viewing figures. If you're joining us for the first time, a very warm welcome to you. We hope you stick around for future instalments and check out our previous episodes. We've covered the first 3 Doctor's eras and the first 6 years of the 4th Doctor. But for now, sit back, relax, and join me once again as we delve back into the wonderfully niche world of Doctor Who viewing figures. Our destination? Season 18. The world had just entered the 1980s, the start of a brand new decade. Like with most new starts, everything was changing. Changing governments, changing hairstyles, changing sounds and music, and also changing events on television. For a show like Doctor Who, entering its 17th year on the air, change was no stranger. But this time around, for Season 18, things would be shaken up a little bit more than usual. A new producer was in the hot seat, John Nathan Turner, and he was determined to bring Doctor Who firmly into the 1980s. Having been a production assistant for the last few years, JNT was familiar with both the programme and the way things were run. He commissioned a brand new title sequence, which was crafted by Sid Sutton, creating the familiar Starfield sequence that we know and love today. Alongside these new titles came a new neon tube logo, and also a new arrangement of the theme music. The Delia Derbyshire arrangement had been used in some form on the programme ever since its inception in 1963, but that was to be replaced with a new arrangement by Peter Howell, one which encapsulated the growing synthesised sound that the 80s was assuring itself in. The TARDIS prop got a brand new revision, and for the Doctor, a brand new costume, one that still incorporated the iconic scarf, but now was dominated by shades of burgundy and question mark collars. Tom Baker, now in his 7th year in the title role, was becoming more erratic than ever. Whether it was challenging directors, bemoaning at the quality of scripts, or his frequent conflicts with the new producer, all contributed to him finally deciding that this particular season of adventures would be his last. So, how did this final run of adventures pan out for the 4th Doctor? Did audiences flock in their millions to see their definitive Doctor bow out, or were people busy watching some of the more glamorous offerings available to them on the other side? Let's dive right in and find out. The first story from Season 18 is the Leisure Hive. On the radioactive surface of Argolis stands the Leisure Hive, where the Doctor and Romana arrive looking for a holiday. Instead, they are caught in a plot involving the tragic Argolin and their enemies, the Fomasi. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 30th of August 1980 and concluded on the 20th of September. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and wow, okay, this is nothing short of disastrous. Just 1 year ago, the show was pulling in over 12 million viewers. With the Leisure Hive, however, it couldn't even seem to crack 6. The peak of this story, in fact, drew in 5.9 million, which was the opening episode. But we can see that across the 4-week run, numbers continued to drop, with the concluding instalment mustering only 4.5 million viewers. In regards to the top 40 TV programmes chart, as you can imagine, Doctor Who would not chart at all. Part 1 reached 77th place, but the remaining 3 instalments all fall below the 100 mark, with parts 3 and 4 jointly recording the weakest showing, as both finished at 111th place, the lowest charting result since the very first story back in 1963. So, despite this being a season opener, and one that was here to boast the new look, sound and feel of Doctor Who, what on earth happened to cause ratings to suffer so drastically? Well, it actually comes down to one of the main factors that we look at on this series, competition. In the previous year, ITV had lost out massively to the BBC due to a prolonged industrial strike, which meant the other side was off the air for nearly 3 months. The first 2 stories of Season 17, Destiny of the Daleks and City of Death, received the highest ratings for Doctor Who thus far because of this, and even when ITV did come back, it took them a fair amount of time to get their momentum back up and running. For this year, however, they were coming back with a bang, and had an ace up their sleeve that they were convinced would defeat Doctor Who utterly in the viewing figures department. This show was American sci-fi import Buck Rogers in the 25th Century. This show had been made in the USA, had a much bigger budget, and was riding off the ever-present success of the Star Wars franchise, whose second film had hit cinemas in the May of 1980. Episodes of the new show were an hour long, and often started 30 minutes before Doctor Who, so the 10 million plus who tune into Buck Rogers were unlikely to switch channels halfway through an episode, even if it was to see Doctor Who. This show was ITV's biggest success against the Time Lord for some years. Never before had it been able to cut into the show's viewership in such a colossal manner. and it's such a shame this happened right at the start of Season 18, a time when so many new elements were being showcased for the first time in the programme. The BBC did attempt a decent bout of promotion for the serial, with it being featured in autumn lineup trailers and a trailer for the season as a whole. The Leisure Hive also got some decent coverage in the Radio Times, with a back page article showcasing the process of making up an old-looking Tom Baker. This feature of the story was heavily teased in various tabloids, and in a separate bout of publicity, a Madame Tussauds waxwork of Tom Baker debuted around the time of the Leisure Hive's broadcast, as part of a Doctor Who experience that the museum was putting on. But it seems that with all the publicity that was thrown at it, it wasn't enough to get the Leisure Hive the viewers it arguably deserved. The new look, feel and sound of the programme are felt right from the start. The brand new theme arrangement, the new TARDIS prop, the new look for the Fourth Doctor, and some of the effects seen really must have felt new and unique back in 1980. I dig a lot of the aesthetic of this serial. The society of the Argolans, and even the aged Doctor looks pretty impressive, though perhaps the element overstays its welcome just a little bit. The monsters are the Fomasi.
You mentioned Fomasi?
Oh, the Fomasi. These guys are fab and all, but really, the budget must have run out slightly when designing these guys. A shame really, as for the most part, the Leisure Hive really looks like it's had some decent money splashed out on it, and the direction from Love at Bickford feels really unique in places, and echoes a style that we don't often see in classic Who. I feel this is a strong start to Season 18, I just wish more people could have seen it in action at the time of first broadcast. Overall, this story attracted an average of 5.1 million viewers, an insane 8.4 million drop from the previous season opener, Destiny of the Daleks. This is by far the biggest decline in viewership we've seen between stories so far, and we haven't sunk this low in averages in 10 years, the last time being 1970's Inferno, which averaged at 5.6 million viewers. It's so sad that Tom Baker's final season kicked off with such an extraordinarily low number, and we can only hope viewing figures will improve as things progress. The Leisure Hive is a perfect example of the way things were shifting in Doctor Who. You can clearly see the change in style and tone with the arrival of a new production team, and even the story itself feels like a breath of fresh air, especially when compared to some of the adventures seen the previous year. It's not the best story ever, but it's one I find a lot of fun, and admire for its willingness to really start the programme's entrance into the 1980s with a bang. To experience it for yourself, you can read the Target book from 1982, or its audio adaptation from 2013. To watch it, you have the VHS release from 1997, or a standalone DVD release, which came out some years later, in 2004. The Leisure Hive is also available to watch on Blu-ray, as part of the Season 18 collection box set. The Leisure Hive may feel like a huge shift away from what the Tom Baker era is best remembered for, but in a way, that's exactly what it was intended to do. It wanted to showcase that Doctor Who could change, it could adapt to new styles, it could adapt to new technology and effects, but despite all that, show that it could also still tell an engaging and fun adventure to millions of viewers. And in all of those respects, the Leisure Hive does achieve that, but hopefully the low viewing average will stand out as a one-time affair, rather than a recurring trend.
Doctor! Doctor! Doctor!
The second story from Season 18 is Meglos. The Savants and Dions of Tigella are locked in conflict over control of the ancient dodecahedron and need the Doctor's help, but Meglos, the last Zolfa Thurin, seeks the power of the dodecahedron for himself. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 27th of September 1980 and concluded on the 18th of October. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and things are certainly not improving anytime soon. 3 of the story's 4 parts fall below the 5 million mark, with Part 2 recording the lowest figure at only 4.2 million viewers. These numbers echo the dark days of Patrick Troughton's final season, and were numbers that had the potential to spell just as much doom for a programme in 1980 as they had done back in 1969. For the top 40 TV programmes, Doctor Who once again missed out completely, and marked the first time that all episodes of a story would chart below 100th place. Part 1 is the highest charter, at 105th, and Part 2 is the lowest, finishing at an abysmal 139th. So, was Meglos just not connecting with viewers? Or was it the damage caused by ITV showcasing its lasting impact? The answer, sadly, is the latter. Buck Rogers continued to dominate the Saturday tea time slot, so much so that higher-ups at the BBC decided something needed to change. Starting with Part 3 of Meglos, Doctor Who would transmit half an hour earlier than normal, beginning at 5:40 PM. This new time slot gave it a 5-minute head start before Buck Rogers, and it was hoped this move would regain substantial parts of the viewing public. The plan worked to some degree, as roughly 500,000 more people did tune in, but it arguably didn't achieve the boost in figures that the BBC were hoping for. The popularity of Buck Rogers was so immense that even if Doctor Who began first, more than 10 million viewers were willing to wait to see the escapades of the astronaut in the 25th century. Though saying that, several people were writing in complaining that the two sci-fi shows were on at the same time and demanded that one of the two TV companies moved their shows so that they didn't overlap at all. This, I would argue, at least shows that there was still a huge interest for Doctor Who, but due to the initial head start and glossier appearance of Buck Rogers, Doctor Who did suffer accordingly. Like with the Leisure Hive, promotion for the serial wasn't half bad. The main draw of this particular adventure was the dual role played by Tom Baker, who, as well as the Doctor, was also playing a Meglos cactus-like version of the famous Time Lord. This imagery was, and still is, extremely striking, and pictures like this were used extensively in tabloids, the Radio Times, and even Madame Tussauds. Their Doctor Who experience had been open for around a month, and the inclusion of a waxwork Meglos Doctor meant that at that time, Tom Baker was the only person to appear twice in the museum. Another strand of publicity for the programme was the announcement that K-9, the Doctor's robot dog, would be leaving the series in the near future. This was met with shock and dismay from younger fans, but not all hope was lost, with producer John Nathan Turner even teasing that one day there might be a Mark III K-9. I wonder if that would ever come to fruition. Meglos itself is a real oddball in my opinion. The story is certainly interesting and has its standout moments, obviously the Meglos Doctor being the forefront of that. The other main factor I remember is the guest appearance of Jacqueline Hill, who in this story plays Lexa, but may be more familiar to viewers as Barbara Wright, one of the original members of the TARDIS team. It's great to see her again, in colour too no less, but ultimately, I've always felt that there is something missing when it comes to Meglos. I'm not quite sure what, but whilst it has a lot of good ideas on paper, ultimately the execution just doesn't do it for me. But hey, watch it for yourself. Chances are you may think the complete opposite and have a whale of a time. Overall, this story attracted an average of 4.7 million viewers, a 0.4 drop from the previous story. It's clear that numbers were not getting better in the short term, even with the time slot shift halfway through the story. And what's more, Doctor Who hadn't attained an average of under 5 million viewers for over a decade, not since the War Games back in 1969. As a matter of fact, Meglos is only one of 3 stories that we've covered thus far that has fallen below the 5 million mark, the other 2 being the War Games and the Smugglers. Despite these disastrous numbers, don't let that stop you from writing off Meglos entirely. There are elements here that some viewers will definitely enjoy. The appearance of Jacqueline Hill, the dual roles played by Tom Baker, and some of the action set pieces are quite nice. If you need a memory refresh on this serial, you can read the Target book from 1983 or its audio adaptation from 2021. To watch it, you have a VHS release from 2003, one of the last titles to be released on the format, or alternatively, you have a standalone DVD release from 2011. You can also enjoy Meglos on Blu-ray as part of the Season 18 collection box set. It has its ups and downs, and Meglos is often derided as being one of the worst Who stories ever, but like all of those stories that gain that reputation, I always think it's worth giving it a second chance. I have done, and sadly, this is a story that I don't revisit often at all, and for me, it falls as one of the low points of the Fourth Doctor's final year.
They've sent for a travelling Time Lord, whose travels I must interrupt. Now, where is he, and when?
The third story from Season 18 is Full Circle. Trapped in the E-Space universe, the TARDIS brings the Doctor and Romana to Alzarian, where the Deciders aboard a crashed Starliner keep terrible secrets. Mistfall is coming, and the Marshmen will rise. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 25th of October 1980 and concluded on the 15th of November. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and whilst on the whole things seem to have improved, there is one glaring outsider. That's Part 2, which recorded one of the lowest viewing figures ever for the programme, with only 3.7 million viewers tuning in. The last time Doctor Who recorded a figure this low was at the end of the 60s, when the show was narrowly avoiding cancellation. The other 3 installments all pull in over 5 million viewers, but to not even crack the 6 million mark across a 4-week story must have been alarming and worrying for both the production team and the higher-ups of the BBC. For the 3rd time in a row, all 4 parts failed to crack the top 40 programmes chart, with every episode charting below 100th place. The lowest example was Part 2, which finished up at 170th. Doctor Who was clearly not in a good state in terms of viewing figures as season 18 progressed, but did Full Circle turn viewers away? Or was it once again outside factors that contributed to the weak showing? ITV was still continuing to see immense success in the ratings field. Buck Rogers was still going out opposite Doctor Who, and was still continuing to attract more than double the viewers that the TARDIS team were able to bring in. But whilst competition may have been the main factor that hindered the viewing figures for Full Circle, in the promotional department, Doctor Who couldn't have been more in the spotlight. For the story itself, press drew upon the arrival of a new companion, Adric, played by Matthew Waterhouse, and he was the first male companion to join in 5 years, and as such, interviews with Waterhouse were aplenty, on shows such as Top of the Pops and The Multicoloured Swap Shop. The young age of Waterhouse and Full Circle writer Andrew Smith prompted a back page article in the Radio Times, and 2 days before Part 1, another new companion was revealed. This was Tegan Javanka, an Australian air stewardess played by Janet Fielding, though her debut in the show was still some months away. Finally, on Friday the 24th of October, it was announced that Tom Baker would be leaving the role of the Doctor at the end of the season. This was a huge blow to fans of the Fourth Doctor, and because he had been the titular character for so long, TV news and traditional newspapers covered this extensively, more so than any other leaving Doctor beforehand. All sorts of names were bandied about as his replacement, and Tom even vaguely suggested that a woman could take the part. However, on the 4th of November, it was announced that Peter Davison, famous for playing Tristan in All Creatures Great and Small, would become the 5th incarnation of the Doctor. This prompted excitement from some viewers and disappointment from others, but hey, what else is new when it comes to announcing new Doctors? Full Circle is the first part of what is known as the E-Space trilogy, as the TARDIS team have slipped into a different universe. The world of Alzarius, the Marshmen that inhabit the swamps, and the society the people have as well, are all very intricate and interesting. I like many of the interactions between the characters, though I must admit I don't immediately warm to Adric in this story. I enjoy the character the longer he stays on the TARDIS, but his introduction misses the mark a tad, at least in my opinion. But a new trilogy of adventures were underway, and even though many millions missed out on its beginning, hopefully they can tune in with the next 2 installments. Overall, this story attracted an average of 5.3 million viewers, a 0.6 increase from the previous story. It's nice to see viewing figures improve, though I wish they had been an even bigger leap up. 5.3 million is the strongest average of season 18 thus far, but that is still a disastrous figure for a primetime Saturday tea time show. And with 3 stories in a row falling this low, I'm surprised BBC higher-ups weren't making more of a fuss about this down to the production team. We also have some repeat data for you. In the now annual tradition of summer repeats, Full Circle was chosen as the first of 2 stories to receive this honour, in 1981. It was also chosen as to help reintroduce the companion Adric to viewers who had missed out on this the first time around. Airing over 4 consecutive days from the 3rd to the 6th of August, here are the viewing figures for this repeat, which averaged out at 5 million viewers, a 0.3 drop from original broadcast. As with many of these summer repeats over the last few years, the reasons for the generally low figures remain the same. The combination of hot summertime weather keeping people outdoors for longer, and the popularity of the competition over at ITV, with soap opera Crossroads continuing to eclipse Doctor Who in the weekday evening slot. Just as an additional note, this repeat was not promoted at all in the Radio Times due to the magazine not being printed due to industrial action. Full Circle is essential viewing if you wish to experience the full E-Space trilogy. As a standalone story, it's perfectly fine. It's not a favourite of mine, but again, like the Leisure Hive, I feel this serial really set out to show viewers how Doctor Who was ready to embrace the 80s. To relive all of that goodness for yourself, you can read the Target book from 1982, or its audio adaptation from 2015. To watch it, you have the 1997 VHS release, packaged with the next 2 stories as the E-Space trilogy box set. This trilogy was released together once again, on the DVD format, in 2009. Full Circle also saw a release on Blu-ray as part of the collection set for Season 18. Whether it's Adric's introduction, the ethereal creepiness of the Marshmen, or to see the world and society of Alzarius at work, Full Circle offers a lot for those who want to experience it. Check it out. It certainly, if anything, acts as a good lead into the next 2 segments of this intriguing trilogy.
You can't fight Time Lords, Romana.
You did. Once.
And lost.
The 4th story from Season 18 is State of Decay. Trapped in E-Space, the TARDIS arrives on a world where the locals live in fear of the 3 who rule. An ancient enemy of the Time Lords sleeps beneath the tower. When it arises, the great vampire will be hungry for blood. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 22nd of November 1980 and concluded on the 13th of December. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and numbers are still sadly not rising all that much. 3 of the 4 parts pull in over 5 million viewers, though part 3 only had 4.4 million tuning in, another disastrously low showing for the programme. And when the peak of your adventure has only 5.8 million watching, it must have made someone at the BBC think if Doctor Who, which was nearly 17 years old at this point, had truly had its day on the small screen. For the top 40 TV programmes, once again all 4 parts fall below 100th place on the chart. The highest charter is part 1 at 119th, and part 3 is the lowest charter at 145th. With viewing figures not improving, did State of Decay suffer once again at the hands of ITV? Or were there any other major factors that could have helped or hindered its performance? Well, ITV did continue the ratings dominance that it had held with Buck Rogers in the 25th century. With the American import now going against Doctor Who in almost every region at the same time, the resultant popularity imbalance caused the TARDIS team to see the low viewing figures attained by the previous few stories. However, in the promotional department, things were once again in a decent place for the programme. State of Decay received a short TV trailer that was aired on the day of Part 1's broadcast, alerting perhaps the more casual viewer that a new serial was due to start. In the print world, Doctor Who was once again the focus of a Radio Times back page article, this time around promoting the recent arrival of Adric and the imminent debuts of new companions Tegan and Nyssa, the latter being announced to the public on the day of Part 1's broadcast. The newly announced 5th Doctor, Peter Davison, was also making appearances in the papers and on TV. One key feature was an appearance on popular chat show Pebble Mill at 1, in which viewers had the opportunity to ask the new Doctor some burning questions. But perhaps the most prominent bit of publicity at the time came on the day of Part 4's broadcast on the 13th of December 1980. It was on this day that Tom Baker and Lalla Ward got married. That's right, the Doctor and companion, husband and wife. The pair had fallen for each other whilst they had filmed the previous season, and even though this event was reported in the papers and indeed on the national TV news, the jubilation shared by fans and the couple themselves sadly wasn't to last. The newly wedded pair had frequent arguments, and in fact, as they filmed State of Decay a few months earlier in May, their disagreements do show on screen, with the pair barely looking or acknowledging each other, which, for me at least, result in some disconnected performances. That aside, State of Decay for many remains a solid vampire-filled adventure, penned by one of the most legendary of Who writers, Terrance Dicks. Having served as script editor in the Jon Pertwee era, Terrance truly had an understanding of what made a fun adventure, and since leaving the show had in fact novelised many stories for Target, both from his own scripts and the scripts of other writers. Whilst this story does flow nicely and has some intriguing concepts, I've never been the biggest vampire fan, and in terms of Terrance's scripts for the programme, this is far from what I would consider his best work. However, everyone has their favourites, and I know many who see this to be one of the finest examples from the 4th Doctor's final year. Overall, this story attracted an average of 5.2 million viewers, a 0.1 drop from the previous story. The viewership on the whole seems to have stabilised out the more that Season 18 progresses onwards, but the immense popularity of Buck Rogers continues to hold Doctor Who down in the 5 million range, an area that last time it was in consistently almost resulted in the programme's cancellation. State of Decay for many is seen as the crowning jewel of both the E-Space trilogy and Season 18 as a whole. Whilst I don't personally agree with that view, it is a story that I can get through easily and have some good fun with along the way. To see where you'd place it, you can read the Target book from 1982 or its audio adaptation from 2016. There is also an abridged reading of the story available on cassette, originally released back in 1981. To watch it, you have a 1997 VHS release, packaged with Full Circle and Warrior's Gate as the E-Space Trilogy box set, and there's also a DVD release from 2009, packaged again with the other 2 stories as the E-Space Trilogy. State of Decay made its way to Blu-ray in 2019 as part of the Season 18 collection set. If you like vampire stories and that more gothic style element seen in a lot of the early Tom Baker years, then you're probably going to get a lot from State of Decay. Nevertheless, it is loved by a lot of people and continues to get reappraisal from fans. You can't really go too wrong with a script from Terrance Dicks, so don't skip it, turn the lights down, and watch out for the bats.
I like a ghost story. Do you want to hear one?
No.
It's about a race of giant vampires.
Vampires?
The 5th story from Season 18 is Warrior's Gate. The TARDIS brings the Doctor, Romana and Adric to the Gateway, Space is contracting, and the Doctor must save the time-sensitive Tharils from slavery before they are all trapped in E-space for eternity. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 3rd of January 1981 and concluded on the 24th of the same month. You may notice there is a slight gap in transmission dates between this and the previous story, but we'll come to that in just a moment. Here are the individual viewing figures from all 4 episodes, and thank goodness this is much more like it. 3 of the story's 4 parts cross the 7 million barrier, the first time that's happened this season, and Part 3 presents a new peak for Season 18, with 8.3 million households tuning in. These numbers don't reach the extraordinary heights of the Hinchcliffe era or indeed those of Season 17, but considering the lows of the last few stories, this is a welcomed improvement. For the top 40 TV programmes, Warriors Gate sadly didn't take Doctor Who back into the chart, but at least every episode managed to settle at over 100th place. The highest charter is Part 3, which ended up at 59th place. So how did Warriors Gate manage to bring the viewing figures up by quite a margin? Had competition finally trailed off? Or were there other factors at play here? Well, first we do need to address the gap in transmission dates between this story and the previous one. After Part 4 of State of Decay, Doctor Who would take the next 2 weeks off the air. These 2 Saturdays fell right in the heart of the Christmas season, and festive television took precedent over the science fiction staple, partly due to their mass appeal and the extremely high viewing figures they could bring in for both the BBC and ITV. In previous years, gaps over Christmas were often filled with repeats of past adventures, but in this case, no such luck. But did this break help Doctor Who recover a decent chunk of the previously lost viewership? I would argue there are a few more factors at play. For one, the show shifted time slot again, taking the earlier time of 5:20 for Part 1 and 5:10 for the following 3 instalments. Instead of going directly against the juggernaut of Buck Rogers, Doctor Who was now going against the talent show Search for a Star. So whilst the show was pushing close to 10 million as it had done in previous years, it's clear this move to an earlier time slot certainly helped the programme incredibly. For promotion, the vast majority of press for Doctor Who in early 1981 centred around the departure of K-9. The robot dog had been an extraordinary hit with children since his debut in 1977, with producer John Nathan Turner even claiming the dog was more popular than the Doctor. Despite the outrage from younger viewers of K-9's departure, J&T had teased that a K-9 Mark III could potentially appear, and sure enough, on the 28th of December 1981, this claim was realised, with everybody's favourite K-9! Whilst K-9 does indeed leave the TARDIS in Warriors Gate, we must also remember that Romana also follows suit, the 2 of them staying in E-space. Lalla Ward really made her incarnation of Romana feel distinct and unique compared to Mary Tamm's original. In many ways, she had to undertake the same task that any actor taking on the Doctor has to do, keeping the core elements of the character present whilst giving it their own unique spin, and I think in her time on the show, she did a remarkable job. Warriors Gate is such an interesting tale to conclude the E-Space trilogy. The time-sensitive Tharils and the concepts explored were arguably new territory for Doctor Who, and for the early 80s, I would argue that it's realised surprisingly well. The story remains incredibly divisive. Some love it for the abstract ideas and unique realisation, whereas others loathe it for the exact same reasons. Definitely one to experience for yourself, but it remains as arguably the most interesting story told within Season 18, and an example of storytelling that we continue to see small glimpses of as the 1980s progressed. Overall, this story attracted an average of 7.5 million viewers, a whopping 2.3 million increase from the previous story. The change to an even earlier time slot was certainly the key factor in this new success. Facing considerably weaker competition would have definitely made Doctor Who more appetising to the viewing public, even if they were joining for the 3rd story of a trilogy. Warriors Gate shows off a style of storytelling that I love to see within Doctor Who, and a style that I wish had been adapted more within the classic series. Though in many ways, you could argue that this serial was very much ahead of its time, and in the 40 years since its broadcast, its distinct style and concepts continue to intrigue audiences of all ages. If it intrigues you and you wish to experience it, you can read the Target book from 1982 or its audio adaptation from 2019. To watch it, you have a VHS release from 1997, packaged with Full Circle and State of Decay as the E-Space Trilogy box set. Alternatively, you can pick up the DVD release from 2009, which again bundles this story with the previous 2, under the E-Space Trilogy banner. You can also find Warriors Gate on Blu-ray, as part of the Season 18 collection set from 2019. Whether you're curious about the concepts or you wish to see how Romana and K-9 depart from the TARDIS, Warrior's Gate will hopefully hold something that will keep you entertained and get you thinking too. But as the Doctor and Adric finally depart E-Space, the Time Lord's final days are drawing nearer. But we've still got a few friends to meet along the way.
K-9, he'll be all right with you behind the mirrors.
I'll take care of him.
I'll miss you. You were the noblest Romana of them all.
The sixth and penultimate story from Season 18 is the Keeper of Traken. The Keeper of Traken is dying, the time of his dissolution near, but something evil has invaded his world and he asks the Doctor and Adric for help. An old enemy lies in wait, and the peaceful harmony of Traken is about to be shattered forever. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 31st of January 1981 and concluded on the 21st of February. Here are the individual viewing figures from all 4 episodes, and whilst things seem to have dipped a little bit, this is still much stronger than the first few stories of Season 18. Part 1 holds the story's peak, with 7.6 million viewers, but sadly it's the only part of the Keeper of Traken that manages to achieve this feat. Part 3 had nearly 2 million less people tuning in, finishing off with 5.2 million viewers. When it comes to the top 40 programmes, Doctor Who missed out once again, and 3 of the 4 episodes fall below 100th place. Part 1 is the exception, which charted at 72nd. The days of a top 40 placement are seeming really far away now though, aren't they? But what did the Keeper of Traken offer audience members? Did new competition come to batter the show, or was this serial just not promoted as well? The shift to the 5:10 time slot had greatly benefited Doctor Who as Warrior's Gate had transmitted, mainly due to weaker competition in the form of Search for a Star. However, from Part 2 onwards, ITV decided to change their schedule. Now the TARDIS team were going up against a new game show, Punchlines, which right from the off proved to be extremely popular. At its peak, the new arrival would attract audiences of up to a whopping 15 million, far outpacing Doctor Who, almost 3 times over in some weeks. For the Keeper of Traken to not drop back to the extreme lows of earlier stories despite this new strong competition is nothing short of a miracle. Efforts in the promotional department were ramped up too, mainly to focus on the debut of a new companion, Nyssa, played by Sarah Sutton. Sarah was a young actress who had recently rose to household prominence with a leading role in The Moon Stallion. On the day of Part 1's broadcast, she appeared on the multicoloured swap shop to take questions from viewers about her previous work, her upcoming role in Doctor Who, and also to give away a few Who-themed prizes. Nyssa's arrival was also spearheaded by another back page article in the Radio Times, plus a trailer for Part 1, that also served to promote the story as a whole to any viewer who was tuning into BBC One. Furthermore, Doctor Who was becoming gradually more accessible to all kinds of viewers. Starting with Warrior's Gate and continuing with the Keeper of Traken, viewers with hearing difficulties could now access subtitles on the BBC's CFAX service, a teletext-based programme that would assist viewers of all kinds and would continue to do so until its closure in 2012. The Keeper of Traken is a great introductory story for Nyssa. The world of Traken feels fleshed out, and like any good planet in Doctor Who, getting an idea of the society of its people helps make it stand out amongst the pantheon of adventures. But perhaps the biggest surprise of this serial, one that was closely guarded from the press, was the return of the Doctor's arch-nemesis, the Master. Having last appeared over 4 years ago in The Deadly Assassin, the Renegade Time Lord appeared once again in his decaying form, this time played by Geoffrey Beevers. It's great to see the Master on screen again, and he's just as malevolent and as menacing as he ever had been. And by story's end, he inhabits a brand new body, and the mantle is passed to Anthony Ainley. And trust me, this won't be the last you see of him on our journey. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.3 million viewers, a 1.2 million drop from the previous story. While 6 million is not the worst average, it's certainly not impressive, and a far cry from the hyper-success of the Tom Baker era just a few years ago. The new popular competition from ITV certainly wouldn't have helped, and even the arrival of a new companion and the return of an old foe seemingly wasn't enough to bring back those lost viewers. We also have some repeat data for you. The Keeper of Traken was chosen to be the second of the 2 summer repeats scheduled for 1981, whilst also serving as a reintroduction for new companion Nyssa for anyone who hadn't seen the serial on first broadcast. Going out over 4 consecutive days between the 10th and 13th of August, here are the viewing figures for this repeat, which averaged out at 5 million viewers, a 1.3 million drop from the original broadcast. This average was also gained by the Full Circle repeat a week prior, and the same factors arguably contributed to these lower numbers, with hot summer weather and soap opera crossroads providing the biggest temptations for audiences to move away from Doctor Who. The Keeper of Traken may come across as one of the more simplistic stories from Season 18, but it's in that simplicity where the storytelling and performances are allowed to shine. Right from the off, Sarah Sutton is fantastic as Nyssa, and her chemistry with Adric and later the Doctor is great. Anthony Ainley also stands out, playing the kind-hearted Treemas for most of the story, before becoming the Master towards the end. It's a really fun little adventure, and if you want to enjoy it today, you can read the Target book from 1982, or its audio adaptation from 2019. To watch it, you have a VHS release from 1993, or a 2007 DVD release, packaged together with Logopolis and Castrovalva as part of the New Beginnings box set. You can also view The Keeper of Traken on Blu-ray, as part of the Season 18 collection set from 2019. The Keeper of Traken may feel a little light to some, but if you're in the mood for a story that's a bit more simplistic, yet packed with action, adventure, strong performances and settings, then this serial will fit that bill perfectly. Much like the E-Space trilogy, The Keeper of Traken experiments with interconnectivity between adventures, and as such, the next story would not only build on the events on Traken, but would set up the end of Tom Baker's unforgettable Fourth Doctor.
A new body at last.
Father?
The seventh and final story from Season 18 is Logopolis. It's the end, but the moment has been prepared for. The Doctor has glimpsed the future, and must once again save the entire universe from his archenemy, the Master, knowing he will make the ultimate sacrifice. This story is comprised of 4 episodes, which began airing on the 28th of February 1981 and concluded on the 21st of March. Here are the individual viewing figures for all 4 episodes, and we can see that numbers have finally begun to hold fairly steady around the 6 and 7 million mark for the most part. Part 2 achieves the highest viewing figures of the serial, with 7.7 million households tuning in, and the following week, Part 3 would record the weakest audience, with 5.8 million viewers coming back to gear up for the Fourth Doctor's farewell. Whilst these are some of the stronger viewing figures displayed in Season 18, it is such a shame that after 7 years in the role, that more people didn't catch the demise of Tom Baker's beloved Bohemian. For the top 40 programmes, the show missed out for the 7th and final time this season. Part 2 came the closest, charting at 57th place, and Part 3 would sink below 100th to record the weakest showing, at 102nd. So, if Logopolis was meant to serve as the grand finale of a 7-year stint for arguably the most adored version of the Doctor yet, why didn't more people tune in? Well, for one, Doctor Who was still going out in the 5:10 PM time slot, which meant that it was going directly against punchlines in nearly every ITV region. With the game show's popularity being widespread and having a few minutes head start on Doctor Who, there were always going to be a section of the audience who weren't going to switch back to BBC One, even for the departure of the longest serving Doctor. Promotion once again, however, was consistent and very strong. Firstly, another new companion was the subject of interviews and press coverage. Tegan, played by Janet Fielding, had been announced some months previously, but in the lead up to her debut in Part 1, various newspapers promoted the Australian's impending arrival. But the main drive of publicity came during the week of the final episode, as all the major newspapers and tabloids carried headlines or interviews detailing the departure of Tom Baker from the programme. Having played the Doctor for nearly 7 years, there were many audience members who saw him as the definitive Doctor, not getting the chance to experience his previous 3 incarnations. But despite Tom's popularity with audiences and the extensive coverage around the final story, it seemed even all of that wasn't enough to get millions of viewers away from ITV to witness this landmark moment. An absolute shame, as Logopolis is not only up there with Warrior's Gate as being one of the most interesting stories this season, but it's a fantastic swan song for the Fourth Doctor to bow out on. There's a feeling of finality throughout the story, and the presence of the ethereal Watcher only strengthens that feeling. With the arrival of Tegan, it's the first time that 3 companions have occupied the TARDIS since 1967, and while some complain that 3 is far too many, even though this is the first adventure for the trio, they all get time to develop their characters and find where their strengths lie within the team. Anthony Ainley gets his first real chance to shine as a new incarnation of the Master, one in which he achieves brilliantly. He holds the menace and charm of Roger Delgado, whilst also adding his own distinct brand of wit and humour, and he would go on to develop this role for the remainder of the 1980s. And of course, there's Tom Baker, the indomitable Fourth Doctor, who despite his problems behind the scenes was able to bow out of the show with grace and a certain degree of dignity. His fall from the radio telescope and his final lines to his young friends are both heartbreaking but also comforting. They hold a sense of hope, and as we all know, if there's one thing the Doctor does bring to us all, it's hope. Overall, this story attracted an average of 6.7 million viewers, a 0.4 increase from the previous story. Whilst this last-minute boost is certainly welcomed, it remains a tragedy that not even 7 million viewers tuned in to witness the end of a Doctor who had very much defined the programme and the franchise as a whole for the past few years. Still, this figure remains one of the highest that Season 18 was able to attain. We also have some repeat data for you. To help bridge the gap between Seasons 18 and 19, a special run of repeats entitled The Five Faces of Doctor Who was scheduled to air on BBC Two throughout the month of November. Logopolis was chosen to represent the Fourth Doctor's era, partly to help reintroduce people to Tegan, but also as it displayed the Time Lord's regeneration into his new fifth incarnation, who is set to debut on TV screens in a few months' time. Going out over 4 consecutive days from the 9th to the 12th of November 1981, here are the viewing figures for this repeat, which averaged out at 5.5 million viewers, 1.2 million less than on original broadcast. Considering this was going out on BBC Two, a channel that generally received less viewership than BBC One and ITV, these numbers are not bad at all, and these relatively successful viewing figures were only set to continue as the Five Faces of Doctor Who season progressed. Logopolis for me remains one of the major highlights of the Tom Baker era, and whilst I mainly prefer the earlier years of his tenure, this story works just as well. The prevailing feeling of finality and dread work extremely well with this adventure's ideas, characters and action pieces. If you want to experience what I'm talking about for yourself, you can read the Target book from 1982 or its audio adaptation from 2010. To watch it, you have the VHS from 1992 or a 2007 DVD release, packaged alongside the Keeper of Traken and Castrovalva as part of the New Beginnings box set. You can also view the Fourth Doctor's finale on Blu-ray, as it was included as part of the Season 18 collection set, which was released in 2019. Logopolis, I would argue, remains one of the finest regeneration stories we've ever had in the programme's long history. It feels epic, yet low-key, a blend that can so easily go wrong, but is achieved wonderfully here. And as we see the Fourth Doctor's friends and enemies flash before his eyes, not only is it emotional in itself, but you can really get a scope and appreciate the long life this Doctor has had. But a new man has arrived, and many adventures will await him and his 3 young companions.
Doctor!
It's the end. But the moment has been prepared for.
So that's Season 18, the 7 stories that comprise it, and the ratings that they garnered. With the transmission of Episode 4 of Logopolis, Season 18 was brought to an end, concluding a near 7-month run, comprised of 28 episodes across 7 stories. Now, let's have a look at story averages for this season. We can see that on the whole, numbers are way down from the previous years in the Tom Baker era, particularly from the previous year's Season 17. The peak comes with Warrior's Gate, which was the only story to cross the 7 million mark, finishing with 7.5 million viewers. The least viewed story is Meglos, which hits a new low for this era, having only 4.7 million viewers tuning in. The remainder of the stories hover around the 5 million range, with the final 2 serials pushing into 6 million, but as stated before, this season really was a poor showing for Doctor Who, at least in the viewing figures department. Now, as we always do, let's work out the overall average for this season. By combining the average ratings for each story, we can calculate that the average viewing figures for Season 18 of Doctor Who stands at around roughly 5.8 million viewers. This is an astronomical 5.4 million decrease from the previous season average, and it awards Season 18 a generally unwanted accolade for being the least viewed season of the show on our journey thus far. It's almost a million lower than the runner-up for the title, which is Season 6, which gained a 6.6 million average back in the late 60s. If that wasn't bad enough, when looking at the Tom Baker years as a whole, Season 18 takes last place by a long mile. The previous 6 seasons were able to all gain an average of 8 million or more, so this showing stands out as the black sheep of the era. But now, as we've reached the end of another Doctor's era, it's time we got really nerdy with numbers and figure out the overall average for the Tom Baker years. By combining the results achieved from seasons 12 through 18, we can calculate that the average viewing figures for the Tom Baker era of Doctor Who stand at around roughly 9.4 million viewers. This means that the Fourth Doctor's tenure is the most viewed on average thus far. It eclipses the previous leader, the Pertwee years, by 1.1 million viewers, and when looking at the first two Doctors' eras, it also surpasses them by 1.5 and 2.3 million respectively. There are obviously a few key factors to take into consideration, one being that Tom Baker had 7 seasons to average out, 2 more than Pertwee and 4 more than Hartnell and Troughton. Furthermore, in terms of story count, Tom Baker had far more than his 3 predecessors. Hartnell had 29, Troughton had 21, and Pertwee had 24. Tom Baker, on the other hand, had a remarkable 41 stories in his tenure, 42 if you include Sharda, and with 15 of those stories having 10 million or more viewers, it becomes very clear why and how this era attained such a high average overall. Season 18 may be a disappointment in the viewing figures department, but in terms of its ambition and creativity, I would honestly argue that it's the most experimental season of the entire Tom Baker era. A lot of that experimentation comes from the new production teams, particularly with script editor Christopher H. Bidmead wanting to inject some real science back into the show, combined with the fantastical elements of stories such as Warrior's Gate. The result doesn't always work, at least for me. Stories like Meglos and State of Decay aren't necessarily my kind of cup of tea, but then there are tales such as the Leisure Hive or Logopolis, adventures that really showcase how Doctor Who can be in the 1980s, whilst also delivering us some concepts and storylines that feel new, exciting, and thought-provoking. For Tom Baker, he wasn't exactly glowing of this season, and indeed, when you watch his performances, there's a sense of morbidity and bleakness that feels the complete antithesis to his wide-eyed, brighter character from earlier seasons. Having said that, the tone of the stories often gel well with Tom's performances this time around, and indeed in his swan song, he really gives his Doctor a cracking good send-off. Tom had the almost impossible task of taking over from Jon Pertwee back in 1974, but now, 7 years later, he was giving his successor the exact same task. Not only did he make the part his own, but he injected so much fun, wonder, and eccentricity into the programme. His early years saw the show ascend to new heights of popularity, consistently breaking its own viewing figure records week after week. It saw experimentation with new ways of telling stories, seen in the Key to Time season for example, and it saw classic monsters return like the Daleks and Cybermen, with a whole host of new foes debuting only to become just as iconic. And through all the highs and lows of the past 7 seasons, it was Tom Baker that acted as the centre point of it all. His jubilance, his passion, and his personality all contributed to him becoming the definitive incarnation of the Doctor for millions upon millions of viewers, both back in the 1970s and indeed today, almost 50 years after his initial debut. After playing the part for 7 years, Tom distanced himself from the programme for some time. He declined to take part in the 20th anniversary special, The Five Doctors, which went out in 1983, and used stock footage from Sharda to fill his absence. Throughout the 80s and 90s, however, he would make appearances at conventions and still keep in touch with the fan community. His involvement in Doctor Who on television remained scarce throughout the Wilderness years, and even when the programme was successfully revived in 2005, he didn't pop up as often as other classic Doctors did to discuss the new show. However, after dabbling with some adventures for Audio Go, Tom would join his other classic incarnations at Big Finish Productions, to record many series of audio stories starting in the early 2010s. Tom now feels like a regular presence at the company, and even in his 80s he captures the same magic and wonder his Doctor had done all those years ago back in the 1970s. The culmination of Tom's return to the franchise arguably occurred in 2013, during the 50th anniversary special, The Day of the Doctor. Appearing as the curator in the story's final moments, Tom finally returned to the programme after 32 years, being as mysterious and mischievous as ever, and reminding millions that in many ways, he still very much was the Doctor. But back in March of 1981, those who tuned in saw this Doctor leave their television screens. A new face had appeared, one that many associated with a vet from Yorkshire, but this fresh, open-faced man was our 5th Doctor, and together with Adric, Nyssa and Tegan, he would begin a brand new era of adventures, for audiences watching in the ever-changing 1980s. So those are the ratings details for Season 18. I hope you enjoyed this numerical look back at Tom Baker's final year as the 4th Doctor, one that's brimming with a lot of imagination and ingenuity, even if it wasn't enjoyed or appreciated greatly at the time. If you want to check out more Doctor Who content, then I highly recommend you check out Doctor Who Home, a great channel that includes news, guides to certain eras of the programme, unboxings, live streams, reviews, and much more. If you want to read more about Doctor Who and the making of it, I highly recommend the Complete History series of books, which I used as reference for this video. If you want to keep up to date with this series, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to see new episodes of the series early, then you can by supporting us on Patreon or via my Ko-fi page. Please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and leaving your thoughts on Season 18 in the comments section below. I've been Adam Martyn from AMTV, and we will see you next time for Season 19.